The Dark Souls games are notoriously known for being hard, and while there are tons of guides on YouTube made to help you beat these games, there are also a ton of them made for doing challenge runs, which those are videos that I really enjoy watching, so that's what I'm going to be doing today. But first, I wanted to give a big shout out to the Backlogs, which is a challenge-based YouTuber, for giving me the inspiration to make this video in the first place, and his challenge run will be linked down in the description below. But without further ado, today I'm going to be asking the question, can you beat Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin Edition, with only whips? Starting my run in the things betwixt, I quickly ran up to the house, created my character, and named them. I decided to pick the Swordsman class due to them having the closest stats to wield the whip I plan on using in this run. And I make sure I get the Petrified Something as my starting gift. To those of you who don't know, you can actually get a whip as early as the tutorial area by going up to this bird's nest. And if you happen to have a Petrified Something to drop on the ground, there's a pretty slim chance the birds will drop you the old whip, which I was actually lucky enough to get it to drop. So not even 5 minutes in, the sexy whip has been acquired. Making my way into Majula, I make sure to grab the Estus Flask shard from the well, then make my way over to Hyde's Tower of Flame, and then light the bonfire. After failing to do the MLG Pro jump over to the chest more times than I like to admit, I finally get it right and then enter the Dragon Rider boss arena. Then I convince him to do the fattest cannonball into the water below. Easiest 12,000 souls of my life. I then port back to Majula, talk to the sexiest firekeeper in the series, then level my dex and adaptability so I'm able to wield the old whip effectively. Then I decide to go test it out on the NPC merchant in Majula, so I can murder him and then take his clothes. But to my disappointment, the old whip ends up being a lot shittier than anticipated and ends up breaking after like 7 whip shots, which is quite unfortunate. Reading up on the old whip on the wiki, it said that it had 40 durability, so I thought it would last a lot longer, but you can't win them all, I suppose. I'll have to resort to plan B. I talk to the chick in the tunnel and get her to move the machine to take me to the Huntsman's Copse, which happens to have the whip I plan on using for the rest of the run. I make my way through the hordes of enemies and pick up the notched whip, and then miraculously survive the encounter. Then I press on to the Forest of the Fallen Giants and then light the bonfire next to the merchant. I then talk to the schizophrenic guy in the Forest of the Fallen Giants cave. He then gives me his house key and a blowjob. The house key will allow me to get another Estus Flask shard later. I pick up the Estus Flask shard next to the Pursuer encounter, and then I ride the slow as hell elevator down to the first real boss of the run, the Last Giant. The Last Giant is never too hard of a challenge, but with this being the first real encounter I've had with the whips, it really shows me the downsides of the whips. The whips in Dark Souls 2 are painfully slow, and the slightly better range that they have don't make up for that fact. But thankfully, the whip's damage isn't too bad, and the Last Giant is weak to bleed damage, which the Notch Whip happens to inflict. The bleed damage is kinda weird in this game, with instead of the percentage-based health that it does in the modern games, bleed damage will always do a flat 200 damage to those it affects every time it procs, which helps speeding up this boss fight. First boss down, and 12,000 souls added to my Ridge wallet. I port back to Majula, upgrade my whip a couple times, grab the Estus Flask shard in the house, and then admire the sexy body of the Firekeeper.
Whew, you looking hot as fuck looking like that, bro. Don't do me like that.
Oh, and also have her upgrade my Estus Flask a couple times.
I will tie your ass to the bed, don't make me.
I then open the door with the key from the Last Giant, make my way up the stairs, and then start the encounter with the second boss of this run, the Pursuer, which happens to be my favorite boss in this game. Despite the Pursuer being cool as fuck, he really isn't that hard of a boss fight. He, like many other bosses in this game, has a fatal weakness. That being, walking to the right, which will cause almost all of his attacks to miss you entirely. So it was a long battle of me walking to his side and getting 1 to 2 whip shots in, and after about 5 minutes of that, the Pursuer goes down. Killing him gives us the Ring of Blades, which gives us extra attack damage on our whip. So I, of course, equip that immediately. Then I use the Avian Express to fly my ass all the way to the Lost Bastille. Then I go ahead and light the bonfire. I make my way through the Lost Bastille until I reach the bomb barrel at the top of the stairs. Then I make sure to give it a hearty push to blow up the wall and the dog passerby below to allow access to Macduff's workshop, which will come in handy later on. Before leaving, I give him his weird fire thing that he fetishizes about, and then I go ahead and take all of his shit. After robbing a senile old man, I make my way back to the Dragon Rider boss arena. I make my way down the elevator to find myself in No Man's Wharf. Making sure I have the torch equipped, I heroically run through the entire level, scaring off all the creatures with the long-ass arms, and then ring the bell at the top of the level to call the pirate ship back to shore. I kick down the bridge to give myself a shortcut back to the boss arena, then I make my way onto the pirate ship to take down my next boss, the Flexile Sentry. The Flexile Sentry was actually a boss that killed me a couple times due to the whole gimmick of the boss arena, with the water rising slowly over time and slowing down my movement speed. Due to the whips not exactly being a powerhouse, this boss fight drags on a little bit longer longer than what I'm used to, and I did not like having my movement speed slowed while this conjoined twin is making a dash towards me. But all I really needed to do was just keep him on the side with the two clubs due to those attacks being a lot easier to predict and dodge out of. And after taking it slow, the Flexile Sentry goes down. So after killing the Flexile Sentry, I set sail on the dark open seas and end up on the other entrance of the Lost Bastille, giving me access to Sinner's Rise and, more importantly, my first Lord Soul boss. I take the elevator down into the dungeon area, run past the same boss I just fought 30 seconds ago, realize I forgot to grab the Bastille key needed to open this door, jump down and pull the lever, and make my way towards my first Lord Soul boss, the Lost Sinner. Now normally you need the Bastille key to unlock 2 doors outside the boss arena and light an oil trail on fire to light up the boss arena. If not, you gotta end up fucking this chick in the dark, and with that sword, who knows where the fuck it's gone. But thankfully, the Lost Sinner is one of my favorite bosses in this game, and her moveset is very fair to play against. With the main problem with fighting her in the dark is your camera going all wonky and losing track of her, which is where she's able to punish you with very quick sword stabs. But me keeping close to her and rolling through all of her attacks keeps my camera relatively steady, and after a pretty short encounter, the Lost Sinner goes down, and my first Lord Soul is acquired. Almost immediately after whipping that bitch back into place, I go back to clean up the mess that I left in the Lost Bastille. That being, the Ruined Sentinels. The Ruined Sentinels was a boss that took me a long time to get through. Naturally, due to there being 3 of them, I would find myself getting jumped and never having enough healing to finish the fight. But eventually I got the winning strategy down. I would 1v1 the first Sentinel using both whips in my hand, killing them quickly. But that would end up with just my other whip to finish the fight with. I would let the second Sentinel jump onto the platform and I would fight them until the third one would also jump onto the platform. Afterwards, I would jump down using the extra space to distance myself and really make sure I had openings to attack them. Other than dodging the spinny bullshit that they do, it was just having patience, targeting one down, and then killing them. But with that, the Ruined Sentinels go down. After acquiring my first Lord Soul, I decide to start working towards another one. So I take myself back through the Huntsman's Copse and go take on my next boss, the Executioner's Chariot. The Executioner's Chariot is one of the most creative bosses I've seen in this series, but this doesn't mean it's a good one. The boss arena is a giant circle where the boss will run around the arena, trampling everything that gets in its way, and your goal is to make it around the entire circle to pull a lever and fight the boss. On your way to this lever, around 10 skeletons will chase you down trying to kill you, and the summoners hiding in the cover of the arena will spawn them infinitely until they're killed. So after you kill the summoners, you could just let the boss take care of the skeletons. Once you pull the lever, you can choose to get absolutely destroyed by the boss hitting the gates, or just fight the boss normally. The boss is actually pretty boring in its attacks, and they're very predictable and easy to dodge and punish. So after 3 minutes of baiting attacks, a cool but very underwhelming boss goes down. But there's a covenant here that increases the buildup of bleed damage just by joining, so this will help our whip out quite a bit. After executing the chariot, I make my way through the entire level of the Huntsman's Copse, dodging past the annoying enemies, getting invaded, and getting shot at by the spellcasters hiding in the cave. And after doing all that, I get to fight yet another underwhelming boss, the Skeleton Lords. The Skeleton Lords is a boss fight where you fight a bunch of skeletons. Who would have guessed? The boss arena has 3 lords that spawn in, with them primarily being spellcasters, but killing them will cause a ton of skeletons to rise from the dead to protect their e-girl. And depending on which lord you kill, they will spawn different types of skeletons, some with swords, some with shields, and they'll even spawn in those dreaded bone wheels from the first game. Like I said, this boss fight is really just walking around the arena killing skeletons, which giving that my whip is able to keep a good distance and hit multiple enemies, it makes an already easy boss that much more trivial. So after getting my cardio in for the day, the skeleton lords go down and I'm able to make my way to Earthen Peak. Earthen Peak is this game's version of the poison swamp that must be in every single Dark Souls game, but this one isn't nearly as long or annoying. I make my way through the Discord mod stink clouds that plague the area, eventually coming across the hot desert chicks guarding a lever. She unfortunately didn't give me her number, so of course I killed her and then opened the door to make my way through and light the bonfire. I then quickly make a detour to the most important part of the area, joining the Heirs of the Sun Covenant and then grabbing the best emote in gaming history. I run through the rest of the level dodging the poison pots and the fat dudes who just can't get enough of them, and then make my way to the area's first boss, the Covetous Demon. The Covetous Demon is the final boss of the Discord mods, acting all tough behind a fog wall to then shit a brick once you actually confront them. The demon is a fat slug whose attacks involve him flailing his arms and rolling around due to him losing the ability to walk during the pandemic. This boss is an absolute joke, and the fight just had me walking to his side for less than 2 minutes as he just sat there and died. But with that, the demon goes down, and I'm able to continue. During the editing process of this video, I had realized I forgot to record me beating beating the final boss of Earthen Peak, Mytha, the Baneful Queen. Instead of me doing the whole game again, I'm just going to move on and show you Iron Keep, which is the level directly after her boss fight. So just trust me when I say that I beat her. I also wanted to let you know that I bought an extra whip from Laddersmith Gilligan in Earthen Peak because the old whip kinda sucked and outlived its usefulness. I then went to the blacksmith and infused it with poison to help out against some of the later bosses until I get a better whip down the line. Speaking of Iron Keep, this level sucks balls. Enemies with constant fast attacks, archers shooting arrows at you, and the constant threat of being knocked into lava. Thankfully, I have suffered enough on this level to know the perfect route to get to the area boss without getting interrupted. But thankfully, the boss here is actually kinda cool. That being the Smelter Demon. The Smelter Demon is a big iron dude who's got a massive sword. The boss has some delayed attacks that feel really good to dodge through once you know the timing of them. And the boss has two stages, where you have his normal stage and then a next stage where he buffs up his sword and heats up his body, dealing constant damage to you if you get too close to him. But in this case, the whip offers a bit of extra range that helps me stay out of his radius for most of the fight. The Smelter Demon is also weak to poison, which helps a ton due to him being quite tanky. So the constant poison damage helps speeding up this boss a ton. But after some sword swings and some AoE explosions, the Smelter Demon goes down. After fighting the Smelter Demon, I reload the area with the bonfire and go back down into his boss arena, allowing me to fight the Pursuer again. Now normally I don't bother fighting the extra pursuers, but defeating this one gives us the Ring of Blades +1, being an instant upgrade to our damage. I make my way through the second half of Iron Keep, which is the part I hate the most, with its archers, the turtle guys blocking you, and as said previously, the constant threat of lava and fire. But eventually we make it through, climb the ladder, and then light the bonfire. Climbing back down the ladder, I make my way over to my next Lord Soul boss, the Old Iron King. The Old Iron King is actually a boss that the whip struggled on a bit more, with the Old Iron King having a ton of HP and being resistant to poison. But thankfully, his attacks are pretty slow, easy to dodge, and he leaves long openings in between his attacks to get some damage in. He would end up spamming his Fire Breath attack during the fight, but after around 5 minutes of me tickling his thumbs, the Old Iron King goes down and we light our second Lord Soul bonfire. After that, I take my way over to the Shaded Woods to show you how hard I make the ladies. I then free Rosabeth, give her some clothes, and then make my way over to the bonfire before the branching paths. Taking the right path, I decided to traverse the fog to a specific chest up on a cliff. This chest gives me the Chloranthy Ring +1, which will give me some extra stamina regen, which is always welcome. After collecting the ring, I take the path through the fog, walk up some hills, and arrive at the ruins and light the area bonfire. I make my way towards the right side of the area and use a branch of Yor to free this Minotaur guy. Killing him drops a key that allows me to free an NPC that'll trade me boss weapons. I thought that I needed her for a whip I plan on getting later, but she was actually unneeded. Oh well, I'd still smash. Anyway, I move through the rest of the area and then make my way to my next boss, that being Scorpioness Najka. Najka is a magic-wielding scorpion chick, very similar to Quelaag looks-wise from the first game. She's completely immune to poison, which sucks, but bleed damage seemed to work just fine on her. You can't get many shots in at a time with the whips due to her having some pretty fast swipes and staff attacks. You also have to make sure that you're always moving around the arena to avoid her tail attacks and her magic. Eventually she'll burrow underground and attempt to hit you from below, but by standing on the stone structure, she'll get interrupted and be stunned for a few seconds, allowing us to get some free hits in. But after a lot of bleed procs, Najka goes down. Moving on from Najka, I decide to make my way to the doors of Pharos, making sure I completely miss the Titanite bug and watch him fall to his death. Gone, but not forgotten. Anyway, I make sure to run through the level super quick and get to my next location, that being Brightstone Cove Seldora, and then I light the bonfire. After lighting the bonfire, I return to the doors of Pharos and decide to take on the boss of the area. Unfortunately, that being the Royal Rat Authority. I'm sorry to all the Royal Rat Authority fans watching this video, all 3 of you, but this boss sucks balls, with it failing to be a fun fight but not even looking cool to make up for it. The start of the fight has you getting ganked by 4 dogs that not only attack super fast, but also inflict toxic. Killing those dogs is already hard enough in a regular playthrough, but try doing it with 2 slow-ass whips that miss the dogs entirely half the time. Which, you know, that means I'm getting toxicked. If I didn't get lucky with the big boss knocking them back multiple times, I don't think I would have had enough healing to survive this. What sucks even harder is that the boss isn't even good or that hard once you kill the dogs. He just swipes at you and pukes on the carpet. Disappointing boss, I'm moving on. I go back to Brightstone Cove and actually decide to go through the level this time, dodging the giant boulders that crush these guys' nutsacks and killing the horde of homeless people to get to disappointing boss number 2, the Prowling Magus and the Congregation. This boss is the equivalent of going to a homeless shelter and the entirety of the population smelling you have some motherfucking Newports in your back pocket. So they all just start jumping you. This boss has 3 spellcasters and a bunch of homeless people jumping you, and it's all about keeping your distance and taking out enemies when you have an opening. I try to take out out the spellcasters first, but the constant threat of homeless people touching my butt makes it a little bit hard. But after a while, the prowling magus and the congregation go down. This boss drops a Titanite slab, by the way. After that, I move through the second half of the level, doing some sick ziplining adventures while annoying spellcasters shoot at me for having too much fun while playing Dark Souls 2. With my trusty torch in hand, I run through the dark spider-infested ruins, making sure to run past all the enemies that followed me down here. Then I go and take on the Big Mama Spider, the Duke's Dear Freya. The Duke's Dear Freya is a pretty trivial but cool looking boss fight, with the main gimmick of this boss is that there's a metric shit ton of spiders and the boss has 2 heads, which I'll be putting to use later. The one good thing that Scholar of the First Sin edition changed was the fact that holding a torch in this boss arena will pacify all the spiders around you so they don't attack. So my main strategy included me getting 1 attack in and then moving over to the next head while the other one was doing an attack. And rinse and repeat until the spider is fully whipped. So after a while of some head-on-head action, the Duke's Dear Freya goes down and I light my 3rd primal bonfire. I head back to Majula, and given that I talked to Laddersmith Gilligan at Earthen Peak, I was able to get him over by the well. I then buy the finest ladder from him and take it down to the gutter. I do my super fast shortcut through the level and make my way to the start of the Black Gulch. The Black Gulch is a shit but thankfully short level, with this level having statues that will spit poison at you, black tar monsters that spawn from the oil pools, and wall worm guys trying to sniff your toes as you run by. Now there's 2 ways of doing this level. Carefully destroying each statue without getting poisoned and kill each enemy individually, or you can run like hell ignoring everything and book it for the fog wall. I, of course, choose the latter. At the end of the Black Gulch is our final Lord Soul boss, that being the Rotten. Aside from this guy being the living embodiment of rotting corpses, my only takeaway is this guy is fat and smells like shit, which is relatable. Getting into the actual fight, this guy has a mix of slow and fast cleaver swipes with some hex magic to keep you on your toes. The Rotten has a grab attack that I would recommend not getting hit by, and a stupid get off me move where he blows himself up, which you can expect to see multiple times a fight. Another neat detail is that you can cut off his arms, including the one wielding the cleaver, but unfortunately the whips don't do a good job at cutting vegetables. So after smelling this guy's shit, the Rotten goes down and I light my last primal bonfire. After lighting your last primal bonfire, Aldia, the game's true final boss, will start blowing you up at random bonfires and start ranting to you about horoscopes or some shit. So after he talks my ear off, I go back to Majula, talk to Mrs. Big Sexy, and level up before the latter half of the game. I head back to the Shaded Woods, this time to make my way through the Shrine of Winter, which allows you to go to the area you'll be spending a large chunk of your time at, that being Drain Lake Castle. I walk up the rainy steps, talk to Mrs. Big Sexy once again, make my way into the castle, and light the area bonfire. Drain Lake Castle is very maze-like, but not all too hard to get through. But some of the gimmicks of this level can be very confusing for a first-time player, like having to kill enemies near these soul vessels to unlock doors, and statues coming to life. But the area boss is so worth it, it doesn't even matter. This boss is where the game peaks, unfortunately. The Twin Dragon Riders are such a masterpiece in character design and in terms of a boss fight. This formidable duo has the Dragon Rider boss from the first boss, and then pairs him up with a second Dragon Rider, this time wielding a bow to shoot down upon you. The design and difficulty of this boss even puts the Ornsteinian Smos to shame. And if this boss didn't feel bad for me, this boss would have taken me till 2025. But by the skin of my teeth, the Twin Dragon Riders go down and we move on to the next boss. Almost immediately after the greatest boss known to man, we fight a not as good but still pretty cool boss, that being the Looking Glass Knight. To start, the setting is fantastic for this boss, having the heavy rain pour down upon you with lightning in the background. The Looking Glass Knight has pretty straightforward attacks, but the main thing that sets him apart is his mirror shield. This shield prevents all damage done to him, causing your weapon to bounce right off. Once his second phase starts, he will summon an NPC invader out of his mirror shield, so be ready to fight a 2-on-1 while dodging his new lightning attacks. While this boss is cool, his attacks are way too simple and easy to dodge for the most part, so he goes down first try. After the boss fight, I take the elevator down to the best level known in Dark Souls history, but first I port back to Majula and talk to Mrs. Big Sexy and level up before my inevitable deaths in hell. There's no easy way to put this, but Shrine of Amana sucks balls. You move through slow as hell water where you can fall out of the level if you're not careful, and while you're doing this, sea monsters will jump out of the water to attack you. And every enemy in this level is not affected by the water's slowdown. And while you're getting jumped by all the enemies, spellcasters shoot homing attacks at you, and the slow attack speed of the whips do not help me out at all. Eventually though, we get to the end of the level, and we get to fight the area boss, the Demon of Song. This old frog motherfucker is slow, has wide sweeping attacks, and hits like a truck. This boss also has a really cool gimmick where it is immune to attacks if it hides its face, dragging out the boss fight for basically no reason. Despite these downsides, the boss is pretty simple, all things considered. So after some patience, the boss goes down and I'm able to claim a new whip from the boss soul. After the boss fight, I make my way to the undead crypt and light the bonfire, only to get blown up by Aldia telling me that I should break up with my my girlfriend due to our incompatible star signs. After that unwanted blowy in the dark alley, me, being a dumbass, forgot to claim the boss weapon before running through the dark level and going to fight my next boss. The crypt is very dark and very maze-like, with skeletons ringing ghost bells that summon a horde of ghosts to attack me. So running like hell, I make it to the next boss. Velstadt the Royal Aegis is the king's personal bodyguard, who wields a big-ass bell used as a hammer. This boss is one of my favorites looks and boss fight-wise. I love the loud thud of the bell as he hits the ground and how relentless and fun his attacks are. Into his second phase, he rings the bell and buffs himself up with dark magic, which he uses for the rest of the fight. Despite him hitting like a truck, I eventually brought him down. After taking Velstadt down, I go back to the Lost Bastille to free this guy petrified in stone. I then trade him the Demon of Song's boss soul for the Spotted Whip, which is a direct upgrade to the poison whip I have currently. The best part about this new whip is that I can infuse the Spotted Whip with poison to increase its damage, gaining a really solid whip for the rest of the run. After infusing my whip, I open the door with the King's Ring to unlock one of the final areas, that being Aldia's Keep. This whole area is a mix of those mirror guys that come out and attack you, and those Cyclops Rhino guys that Kool-Aid man through doors. I also found out about the secret bonfire. The more you know. Our next boss up is the Guardian Dragon, which is one of the most uninteresting bosses in this game. This dragon is the same dragon seen from the Hyde's Tower of Flame, except now it flies around for the majority of the fight and sometimes spews fire at you. Just be sure to dodge its swipes and bites and book it to the other end of the arena to avoid getting hit by the fire. Other than that, easy boss down. I then take the long-ass elevator to one of the coolest looking areas in the game. I talk to Mrs. Big Sexy once again, go on a big zipline adventure, and light the second area bonfire. I then get blown up by Aldia again. This time he rants to me how he can't help himself because he's a Sagittarius. Making my way through the Dragon Shrine, I eventually get to the top and talk to the Ancient Dragon. This overgrown lizard gives me the Ashen Mist Heart, which allows me to go into the memories of specific objects to fight one of the game's final bosses. I then try beating the shit out of the dragon, to which my strategy of hiding under its toes while I poke it with a stick failed miserably. I then said fuck that shit and moved on. I then used the King's Ring to activate this door, and walk up to those tree things you see throughout the game. Using the Ashen Mist Heart allowed me to enter this memory and maneuver through a huge battlefield to fight the boss within the memory. The boss of this memory is the Giant Lord, which in this game story is also the last giant that you fight at the beginning of the game, which is pretty cool. But that doesn't make up for the fact that this boss is complete shit. You're forced to fight this guy at the back of the arena to make sure you don't get blown up by the trebuchets launching fireballs. But you really don't need to worry about that. You can just hang under this guy's nutsack and dodge one of the 3 moves he's gonna use to stop you. He's either gonna stomp with either of his feet, or he's gonna do a sword swipe to get you out from under him. But by carefully walking, you can avoid almost all of these attacks with relative ease. But make sure you don't get hit by anything because he does hit really damn hard. Anyway, round 2 with the last giant goes in my favor, and I move on to the endgame. Going back to Drangleic Castle, we can start the endgame. By using the King's Ring to open this door, you can walk through and talk to Shanalot, my beloved. She lore dumps about herself, and then you can continue your way to claim the Throne of Want. The Throne Watcher and Defender are one of the final bosses, and this one actually took me a couple tries. Given that it's a gank boss and the whips have very slow movement speed, this is a long fight of running, getting one attack in, and getting the hell out of the way. When their health gets low enough, they buff their swords with lightning damage to hit even harder. Once you kill one of them, you have to be quick to kill the second one, or else they'll revive each other and you have to start the process all over again. But with enough patience, the Throne Watcher and Defender go down, and I move on to my second boss. Immediately after you beat the Watcher and Defender, the battle with Nishandra begins. She is easily the most underwhelming final boss in Soul's history, with her moveset being a joke. She swipes at you with her scythe and will eventually spawn these orbs that will curse you if you stay by them for too long. She uses a bit of dark magic to shoot at you, but the only cool attack she has is her laser beam. But that doesn't make her fight any more fun. And with that underwhelming fight out of the way, Nishandra goes down. But wait, you didn't think I was done, did you? The true final boss is only obtained after you kill the former king of Drangleic, that being Vendrick, which I unfortunately do not have the footage for. Don't worry, you weren't really missing out on much anyway. Anywho, Aldia will start monologuing to you about how a Leo can't take the throne due to them being too self-centered to rule, and then the fight begins. Aldia is a cool boss story-wise, but fighting him is just as boring as Nishandra. While he is attacking, he has a constant ring of fire around him that will do massive damage if you try going near him to attack. And even if you do hit him, he has major damage reduction to attacks. He uses fireballs and his tentacles to damage you, with the only real threatening attack being the large fireball that has a huge radius. But once his attacks end, he leaves himself open to attacks before teleporting away and then starting the cycle over. And after a very drawn out 8-minute fight, Aldia goes down, completing the challenge run. And that will about wrap it up. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and if this video does well enough, I'll even make an entire video of me doing the DLC with whips as well. And if you enjoyed this video, there will be more of my main funny moment structured videos at the end of this video. But with that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you all later.